here's my perspective on 1000 KDA, which is Kadena's native cryptocurrency. Now, even though nothing I say is financial advice, what do I mean about my perspective on 1000 KDA? Well, it's because if, let's say, in a make-believe scenario, someone asked me about 1000 KDA, I'm not talking about the dollar amount, I'm talking about just the amount of KDA. It's not an amount where, let's say, hypothetically, I would find disappointing if I was holding KDA, that amount again, right? Especially if I'm holding other projects too, because let's say, for instance, for whatever reason, KDA went to the price of $10. Now, 1000 times 10, that's 10,000. However, if let's say out of that 10,000, for whatever reason, I saved 30% of that. So I use that for the next cycle. And for whatever reason, that 3 grand from that, 30% that I saved from that 10 grand does a 10x, becomes 30 grand for whatever reason during the next cycle. It's not something I would find disappointing, actually. And again, if that's not the only thing I'm holding, I would find that even more not disappointing, right? Or should I say even less disappointing? But this is all my perspective. I'm not telling them to do anything when it comes to Kadena. But to me, just the idea of maybe $10 wouldn't necessarily surprise me because it is around a 28x from here. First of all, I understand that it's not going to be the best hypothetical upside of all time. And how can it? KDA does not have a quite, relatively speaking, the lowest market cap out there. I mean, it's pretty okay sized. But then also, when I take a look at $10, right? Market cap at that point, considering current circulating supply, would be around 3 billion. Which just doesn't really seem that ridiculous to me because, for instance, if I take a look at BNB, even though during this cycle reached a new all-time high, whereas we kind of saw, KDA not do good, really in the grand scheme of things, but you know what, I'm still staying patient. But besides that, BNB back in 2021 reached a market cap, even back then, right, at one point over 100 billion. So if I take a look at that, around 3 billion in the grand scheme of things doesn't seem that ridiculous to me, especially considering how, when it comes to Kadena, I do like it as a layer 1 blockchain. Now, let me explain why, because even though a lot of people out there like to say, oh, there's so many layer 1 blockchains out there, who cares? Kadena is under some stiff competition. Take a look at Solana, which is more established. Take a look at, something like BNB, which has a very massive market cap. Take a look at Algorand. Take a look at Avalanche. There's a lot of competition. Totally aware of that. But at the same time, what I find makes Kadena kind of unique, I would say arguably, is the team. Now again, when it comes to this aspect, sometimes people don't really care. But to me, I care because I feel like a project can be okay, right? But if it has good leadership, I think in the long term, it could do better than maybe a project that is very amazing fundamentally, but doesn't have such maybe that good of a leadership. Now, what do I mean by leadership in this case, right? Or should I say the team of Kadena? If I take a look at the founders of Kadena, it's Will Martino and Stuart Popejoy. And when I take a look at what is so impressive about their resume, for instance, because they both actually helped build JP Morgan's first ever blockchain. So again, it is pretty interesting to me, not to mention, if I take a look at another, aspect of Kadena's team, it is somebody by the name of Dr. Stuart Haber. Now, Dr. Stuart Haber, by the way, is supposedly the co-inventor of blockchain. I mean, let's just let that sink in. The co-inventor of blockchain is on Kadena's advisory team. That is so impressive to me. Not to mention, Dr. Stuart Haber is allegedly the most cited author in Satoshi Nakamoto's Bitcoin white paper. So just imagine that. The most cited author. That is just very impressive, in my opinion. Now, this is all supposedly and allegedly, but I just kind of find this very unique when it comes to Kadena. And sometimes people like to say, okay, but again, there are so many layer 1 blockchains. However, I don't think it's just one blockchain and then the rest don't really exist because let's just take a look at some examples right now, right? Sure, there's Ethereum, which is a very massive layer 1 blockchain. But then, of course, there's also Solana, which is very massive. There's also BNB, right? When it comes to its market cap, that's very massive. If I take a look at something like, again, Avalanche's native token, AVAX, that's also very massive. Take a look at Algorand's native token called Algo. Again, there's many layer 1 blockchains out there. It's not just one to really do all the things, right? There's also, we take a look at some of the more famous competitors, I would say, when it comes to Kadena, like a Sui, for instance, or like, say, personally, in my opinion, KDA does not need the biggest market cap out there. I'm not expecting Kadena to be the biggest thing out there. However, again, going to around a $3 billion market cap, around a 28x from here, I would not complain about that personally. I'm not telling it to do anything, but it's just my point of view. Now, also, I think sometimes people like to tell me, oh, developers, they're not going to choose Kadena. And then sometimes when I ask them why they think that way, they tell me because, Pact, right? Now, Pact is spelled P-A-C-T, but that is the programming language used in Kadena smart contracts. And a lot of people tell me because of this, Kadena really isn't going to see good adoption. And then sometimes when I ask them, okay, why? They say, oh, because it's kind of complicated. However, my response is this: why would a developer find that challenging? You know what I mean? I just don't get it, because, yeah, sure, it's not that popular, but does it mean it's complicated, especially for a professional? I don't think so. It's like, imagine if I was playing in the NBA, right? I was playing basketball, and then I'm like, oh, I don't want to shoot three-pointers because, it's difficult. Like, what? Like, how does that make sense? If I'm actually a basketball player, shouldn't I be able to do kind of all the things at least, right? So then that excuse of, oh, Kadena's not going to see good adoption because of Pact, again, P-A-C-T, I just have a hard time kind of thinking that way. Yeah, sure, again, Kadena's not that popular, but I don't know if that's going to be such a major issue moving forward, but you know what? Only time will tell. But personally for me as well, if I take a look at, let's say, Kadena, people like to say, oh, again, the adoption isn't the best. Well, as of right now, I think it's more so kind of the narrative, kind of the story, and more so kind of what something could be as opposed to what it already is. I don't think it's just mainly tied to the adoption currently, because if that was the case, I think many projects out there that are massive really wouldn't be that massive. So again, I still like Kadena's vibe overall, and KDA maybe at the price of $10, it just wouldn't necessarily surprise me. Now, some people like to say, well, when is Kadena going to do something? Right? Because we've already seen it kind of not do good, actually. We've seen some momentary moments of, brilliance during the cycle. But you know what? I'm still staying patient, because whenever the market does decide to wake up, it's beyond my control. And as of right now, we're seeing more of the bigger caps, do well, right? Of course, we're seeing Bitcoin, we're seeing Ethereum, we're seeing some of the bigger projects like BNB. But what happens if it starts, trickling down eventually to more so of the mid caps and then the smaller caps, and then just kind of having that rotation, the way you take a look at it? If KDA maybe had some attention, or should I say Kadena, wouldn't surprise me. Now again, when will that happen? Who knows? It's beyond my control. Me believing in a project, me being a fan of a project, it does not mean it's going to do good. Like, the only thing I'm doing is literally just believing in something and then seeing what happens. That's literally about it. I cannot control anything that happens to Kadena. I cannot control anything that happens to the market. That is all literally beyond my control. Literally the only thing that is within my control is myself. And just focusing on things, again, that are within my control, such as dollar cost averaging, holding, waiting, and staying patient. I'm not telling you to do anything, by the way, but this is just what I'm doing. So whenever an altcoin season ever wants to start during this cycle, whether or not it happens this month, or maybe it waits next month, or the month after that, or maybe even next year, whenever that time frame is, maybe even waiting until March of next year, that's literally outside of my control. But I can just stay patient and just wait for a moment in time it does something, so then hopefully I'll go along with the ride. But yeah, ultimately I'm just still staying patient. And I want to say thank you for watching this video. I greatly appreciate it, and also feel free to subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I'd also greatly appreciate that as well. And it's been Lee the Captain, and I'll catch y'all on the next one. I'm out. Peace. Bye.